Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Kat. Real quick, I'm going to do a probably 6-minute presentation on fraud reporting and investigation at Aaron. I'll have time for a couple of questions, and we'll fit in the 10-minute total slot. So let me start right in here. You've heard about individual incidents, so like if there's a major event, you might hear about it. But the last time we reported on that, a major fraud situation where someone managed to effectively get resources improperly, I noticed that some people weren't aware of what we're doing in general. So this is the general process for how we handle fraud reporting and investigation at Aaron. So why does it matter? Well, we're a registry. Our whole purpose is to provide accurate information. If the registry is full of inaccurate information, you might as well not have a registry. So it's a core function for us. It's essential to the mission. We pretty much spend an enormous amount of time working on issues related to fraud, though a lot of it is not visible in general. So let's see. Let's talk about how we handle this. Since 2008, we've had a formal process for reporting fraud. So before that, you could talk to us and it wasn't really formalized. We didn't necessarily track things. But since 2008, there's a formal fraud reporting process. And it's our preferred way of receiving reports. I'll talk about why that is. But at a high level, if you're going to report Internet number resource fraud to Aaron, we'd like you to do it this way. I'll explain why. It's pretty simple. So if you go to the website, Aaron, Reference Tools, Fraud Report, you can also do the menus to navigate to it. Click on that and it provides a form that describes what number of resources you think are incorrect in the database, i.e. have been obtained fraudulently, have been transferred fraudulently, or are now in active use by someone who's not the right owner and doesn't have the rights. They've effectively hijacked the use of the numbers. And why? Well, we'll ticket that. We'll treat that as a request. We investigate it, we track it. The information that we use to track it is all formalized. Now, some of you know Aaron's staff. Some of you send email to Aaron's staff saying, hey, you should look at this number. And depending on who you send it to, they may look into something. They may refer to their manager. They may open up a fraud report, but they may not. And by the way, when 3 of you report it to 3 different staff members, I have 3 different staff members all looking at the same tickets at the same time, when if you make a fraud report, I'll have it happen once. So it really is preferred. It means that we actually track it. We all know what's going on. We don't have duplication. If someone else reports a similar one, we can immediately tie back into the investigation. Now, what's the alternative? So, talk to us. Email. Help desk ticket on www.aaron.net. Email hostmaster@aaron.net. Send an email to the Aaron staff. Call the help desk. Show up at the help desk that we run at the various conferences. Any of those will also result in us looking into a problem, but may not result in a fraud ticket and may not result in a formal investigation. We have a lot of things going on. If you don't think it warrants opening a ticket with us through the fraud report form, we may not decide it warrants investigation. Now, clearly, you report something to us that's substantial and something that has good evidence, we kick off an investigation. And we'll do that if we see the same information show up on an operator mailing list like NANOG, show up in a security blog, or a security mailing list for security mitigation, or an RIR mailing list. We do pay attention to these, and if we see a substantial incident that has good documentation, we'll actually open up on our own a resource review and take a look at what's going on. But you're not assured of that unless you use the fraud reporting form. Also, the other nice thing about the fraud reporting form is that we provide a quarterly report on the website of every ticket opened and what happened to it. Now, if you look at the quarterly reports, you can go to the Aaron website, you'll see that most of the tickets say out of scope, out of scope, out of scope, out of scope. Oh, one of them will say, oh, inappropriately obtained, record reverted to the original party, out of scope, under investigation. The out of scope ones are mostly people reporting spam or phishing or something else. They're saying this address block is sending bad traffic, doing naughty things. Not Aaron's job. Internet number fraud reporting is about a number resource block being assigned to the wrong party, being transferred to the wrong party, someone successfully coming in and hijacking the entry for a block. It's about who has the rights to number resources. We are not the internet police. A lot of people are really quick to say that, and I'm very quick as well. We're not the internet police, but we do police the registry. We are not the ones you report your spam to, your abuse, your other. That's up to you ISPs to work out among yourself. So, types of fraud. Attempts to change registration data improperly. People who very carefully change FISBIN LLC to FISBIN Inc. to FISBIN DBA, and then eventually tie it to their brother's company and take the number resources. False information provided for purposes of obtaining number resources. People who send an application in and they're falsifying their request. They literally are talking about infrastructure they don't have or past address blocks they've been assigned, which they haven't been, to make their request valid. And then theft of number resources through identity theft. Literally, we ask someone, oh, you're Tim Smith. Yes, I'm Tim Smith. Send us your driver's license. And they send us a copy of a Tim Smith's driver's license. Why? Well, they went to the phone book and found 5 Tim Smiths, and one of them, for $100, was willing to say, I'll give you a copy of my driver's license. So we have people stepping in on other people's identity so that they can then step in and hijack number resources by being the CEO or the VP of IT. These are all fraud. Report any, if you have any cases you hear things like that, report them. So what happens? We assign an analyst, we make changes to the records, we note all the changes that have been done, all the documents, all the tickets, everything that went into the change we put in place, and then we have an internal review of it. What will happen if it turns out that it was fraud? We'll revert the changes. Folks, if you get a number resource from Aaron through a transfer or get assigned and you used fraud to do it, it will evaporate on you. We will revert the changes, okay? It's that simple. Your application to us says it was an honest application. So if it wasn't, you just revert it. And if you don't like that, you can try to address that in any recourse you want in court or whatever, but not our problem. So do not apply for resources fraudulently. Do not transfer resources fraudulently. It will go right out from under you. I don't care. Sorry. We'll lock records. If we have a dispute, and we have disputes now and then, party broke into 2 different pieces and no one really said who got the address block rights. Oh, okay. And then there's dispute about it. A lot of times we just lock the records. We lock it. Okay, you two work it out on your own or work it out in the court system. Tell us when you're done. And so sometimes that's what we end up doing. Initiating customer audits. Sometimes we don't have fraud, but we have good evidence that something's close, and we'll go contact that entity and say, look, you have a lot of suspicious transfers or assignments, and we're going to do a resource review. We're going to do a full audit of your number of resources. Try to be careful about that, because, you're all businesses. You don't want one guy DDoSing another with Aaron audits. So we really only do this if there's credible evidence that the audit's going to show something. And reporting illegal to law enforcement. We do this. If you actually, in the course of getting number resources, violate the law, commit fraud, wire fraud, you'll be reported to law enforcement. Law enforcement takes an active interest in these things. They spoke at the last, some of the people we work with every day spoke at the last NANOG meeting. And you can end up being indicted on wire fraud. It has happened. There's a party running around with 20 counts against them right now that is going through the system. So that's kind of it. We do spend a lot of time dealing with this. We try to be transparent. We do provide reporting, but if you, as a community, want us to publicly say why a particular resource is correct or not correct, we're probably unable to do that because realistically there's NDAs in the information involved, and there's some protections we need to do to make sure we don't expose Aaron to libel and slander. That's it. That's the whole process. I might have 20 seconds for questions, so if anyone wants to ask 1 or 2 questions and run to the mic, you can do it. I see none. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. So next we have John Christoph. He is a PhD student and researcher at DePaul University.
Slight correction, Kat. Actually, the researcher part is at UIC, but that's no big deal. So there's my bio. I'm John. The people that I'm working with this project on are below. I'll try to make this as quickly as possible so we leave any time that may be needed for Q&A and not to trespass on the time of the lightning talk to follow. So many of you are very familiar with RPKI, especially lately. This has been a hot topic. So I'm just going to very briefly just remind you that there's three essential components to the RPKI. On your left, there's the repositories or trust anchors. These are essentially the IRRs that have all the ROAs. In the middle, this is all the relying party software, the cache servers. This is the stuff that synchronizes the ROAs, grabs them, and does the validation so that it can pass it on to those things on the right, those routers, where you can do your route origin validation. There's been a number of studies that have looked at who's publishing ROAs and how many ROAs are out there and which regions are publishing the most ROAs and so forth. And there's been some studies where people are looking at who's actually doing route validation, and we hear about people, seems weekly now, who are starting to reject or drop routes that are invalid. So that stuff has been looked at a fair amount already, but what seems to be a missing piece is that thing in the middle. What's happening there at those caching servers? That's what we're kind of interested in. So the question is, are those caching servers consistent? You might have some sub-questions to that, and if they're not, why not? You might modify that question slightly because of the way that the RPKI works. There's some delay, so you might say what's reasonably consistent. And what effect, if it's unreasonably consistent, would that have on your actual, your routing tables, on your validation? So here's what we're doing. We're trying to get access logs to, or from the repositories, so the IRRs essentially, look at who's grabbing or who's doing the synchronization of the ROAs, looking at essentially the IP addresses that are doing that, what they're grabbing, the frequency, the intervals, and all that. Trying to then synthesize that data, make sense of it, analyze it, and then produce maybe some useful results. So I'm just going to show you a few brief pictures really quick, and the graphs and the charts aren't necessarily something you should really focus in on as being really saying a whole lot, but just to give you an idea of what we're trying to actually do. This is just kind of a taste. So I know in the back some of these slides are maybe hard to see, but again, the numbers don't necessarily matter. But we're looking at the method of synchronization is essentially two. You will either do rsync or RRDP, which is essentially rsync, but specific to RPKI. Who's doing what? Maybe you're doing both. We're looking at the IRRs themselves. Who's accessing those? The number of caching servers that are accessing them may vary. That may be a sign of inconsistency. We're looking at the actual cache server population itself. How many people are actually pulling ROAs from the repositories? This graph is a little bit old now, but at roughly the time there was maybe 500 plus or so. That number might be higher now, and we differentiate based on the access method. And then when you start doing all this stuff, the thing that really kind of answers part of that consistency question is, what are the differences? If we have a view into the cache servers, are they all reasonably consistent? And the short answer is so far is, well, not exactly. Some of them are a little bit different. Some of them don't have the same information or are not getting the same information. Maybe there's one set of cache servers that just aren't synchronizing from one of the IRRs. Why? We may not be able to answer that question, but at least if we identify that, that might tell us something about how validation is actually being affected by this. So that's kind of what we're doing. There's some add-on work. So I came into this work a little bit later, but this is some of the stuff that I started doing as well, is looking at the, trying to get not only a view at the repositories, the access is there, but also the cache servers themselves. Can we get more information from those of you who run those? Some of those are open, so I might be able to rsync maybe directly off you or get a look with the RPKI router protocol to see if you'll give me a copy of what's in your cache. That might be interesting. You might not want me to do that. I would prefer, and so this is an ask for you now, if you would be willing to let me look at your cache in some way, either through logs or give a read-only feed, that would be lovely. I'd be very anxious to talk to you if that's something you might be willing to do. That'll just help inform whether we can determine with more accuracy the caches are consistent. But I am trying to actually do this without your help as well. So going around maybe looking to see if I can discover any that may be publicly accessible. And there's a couple of ways to do that. So, and I just sort of enumerate those briefly here. We can talk about more if you have questions or offline. So that's roughly it. Hopefully that was nice and enlightening enough for you. Here's my contact info. If you have any specific questions that you don't care to ask here, I will be available for the rest of the week in NANOG. Thank you very much. Questions? Looks like one question.
Hi, Tony Tauber, Comcast. I was talking to someone who's operating such and said, asked about the cache consistency, and they said, oh, it seems to be pretty good, even among a couple of different, like the RIPE validator and routenator. And then another comment was that the router seems to deal with the union of those two. So if you've got a router that's getting information from multiple caches,
right,
it's, the consistency maybe in effect is less of a problem.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that we're going to see much of a difference between the implementation types of the relying party software, so like routenator versus RIPE or what have you. But we do see differences how they might be set up and configured. Like, so sometimes we see some of them synchronizing like every 15 seconds versus 10 minutes versus 30 minutes or whatever. So you see some of those differences as well. And that may not have an unreasonable effect on synchronization just for the reasons you cited. But we're really interested in whether someone is not synchronizing for something where there's long outages or that sort of thing. So,
cool. Thanks.
All right, thanks again.
Thank you. Next, we have Theo Voss with Nexia. Thanks.
Hello, guys. Thank you very much. My name is Theo. I'm head of network engineering for Nexia from Europe, actually. And I would like to talk about routing security today. But this time, I would like to talk about a feature which is pretty new, but it's also pretty easy to use and can really help us to make fighting route leaks way easier. So currently, all the route servers I'm aware of do origin validation. They use IRR data, they use RPKI data, but there's almost no path validation, except for some really advanced carriers and ISPs using features like PLOG. But as you might agree, there are certain ASNs which should never be visible via route servers. For example, large tier 1 providers or networks never participating via route servers. But currently, and this is a pity, there's no single source of information about these networks. And these networks means networks not participating or which should not be visible at all over the route service. But unfortunately, and I took this screenshot this morning from our DKIX connected router in Frankfurt, there are plenty of routes we receive which contain tier 1 providers or ASs which should not be visible in routes. For example, here you have NTT, we have Deutsche Telekom, and we have Cogent. And this list is not complete. So we see many, many routes of these types from large operators, tier 1 providers, and non-route server participating ASNs. And since a few days, or actually a couple weeks, there's a new feature available in PeeringDB, and I'm not affiliated to PeeringDB, by the way, which is called Never Via Route Service. And as you can see on the right side in the red box, there's a new checkbox called Never Via Route Service, where you as a peer or as a maintainer of a record in PeeringDB can indicate if your network or your routes advertised should be visible on route servers at all. This is an opt-in feature, so by default it's set to false, but you can set it to true and indicate to others that your route should not be visible. The feature is in PeeringDB since version 2.18, and as of today, on all the internet exchanges the company I work for is participating, 8 networks so far have adopted this feature. And you can really easily use this feature by using the PeeringDB API. You can do a PeeringDB API call to get all the networks, all the exchanges your network is taking part of. That's the call on the lower side of the slide. It gives you all the IDs of these internet exchanges. And from that place, you can grab all the AS numbers which have set never via route service to true. This list is not complete, but currently, as I said, 8 networks do this. So what we do as Anexia since about two and a half weeks is we, on a daily basis, generate filters based on these API calls, on this PeeringDB entries, and publish these filters to all our IX-connected routers. And we're now dropping all these ASs from routes where this ASN is part of the pass. If you do peer with a route server, if you do use PeeringDB, and if you do not want to have your routes distributed over the route server, please go to PeeringDB and just quickly press that button and check that box. And if you don't filter yet, please do it. Please use that capability or that feature in order to drop routes peers do not want to advertise over route service. That's it. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry for the delay. We have a few minutes. We're trying to relocate our next speaker. So bear with us just a few minutes. Thanks.